Sarah Palin. Oh, whew. Revelations from Game Change and from Steve Schmidt are catastrophic. Okay, now yesterday we told you about how she wouldn't prepare for the Katie Couric interviews. She kept, and before we told you about how during the debate prep, she was calling Joe Biden Joe O'Biden, and they couldn't get her to pay attention, and they were worried about her health because she wouldn't eat. Well, there's more revelations on that. First, apparently the McCain advisors thought that she had wild mood swings, and they began to be worried if she had postpartum depression. We touched on that yesterday. And now the eating issues. They say, quote, she wasn't eating a few small bites of steak a day, no more. She wasn't drinking maybe half a can of Diet Dr. Pepper, no water ever. She wasn't sleeping, not much more than a couple of hours a night, max. That's what they write in the book. While being drilled for upcoming interviews, she would, quote, routinely shut down, chin on her chest, arms folded, eyes cast to the floor, speechless and motionless, lost in what those around her described as a catatonic stupor. Yesterday we told you in the book they revealed that the advisors of McCain were worried that she was mentally unstable. Now we find out they were also worried that she was in a catatonic stupor. Now, by the way, why isn't she eating? Well, it turns out that she was very concerned about looking fat. Now, the day of the famous Katie Couric interviews, apparently she was looking glassy-eyed, and somebody described her as looking glassy-eyed and dead, actually, in prep for the CBS interview. And then they put the makeup on her, and she said, quote, again, this is according to the insiders that talked to Halpern, etc. She said, I hate this makeup, smearing it off her face, messing up her hair, and complaining she looked fat. You're about to get interviewed on national television about the issues, and they can't get her to concentrate on the index cards that they've given her, which is the second part of this revelation, which is devastating. They're like, please, please concentrate on the policy issues. And she's worried about the makeup doesn't look right, she looks fat, and she won't eat because she's afraid that it'll make her look like she's fatter. Stunning lack of substance, right? So then we get to the scene before the debate with Joe O'Biden. According to the book, Mr. Schmidt and Rick Davis, McCain's campaign manager, arrived at Ms. Palin's hotel room in Philadelphia and were, quote, appalled by the scene that they found. The room was hot and claustrophobic. The shades were drawn. The place was full of half-eaten hotel food and stank of moldering French fries. Palin, looking dazed, was surrounded, as usual, by stacks and stacks of index cards. According to the book, the camp was ready to downgrade vice presidential candidate Ms. Palin's responsibilities in the event of victory, reducing her role to, quote, the largely ceremonial role that pre-modern vice presidents inhabited. Now, look, first you look at that and you say, wait a minute now. You can begin to question this a little bit because before you were saying she only ate small pieces of steak, and now you got the French fries lying around. I don't know if the first dude was eating that. You can't have it both ways. So be a little skeptical about the reporting. That's normal and natural, right? On the other hand, if you believe the insiders, they're the ones saying, we were so worried about her that we weren't going to let her do anything if she became vice president. Well, then aren't you grossly irresponsible for continuing to have her as your vice presidential nominee? This actually speaks more poorly of those insiders and those campaign managers for McCain than it does of Sarah Palin. You got a woman who you think is in a catatonic state, who's mentally unstable, and doesn't know a damn thing about foreign policy, let alone all policy, and you're still keeping her as your VP nominee? How terribly irresponsible is that? Now, turning to Palin, you believe however much of that you think makes sense, right? On the foreign policy stuff, they've got a lot of people saying it. Many more sources are quoted. Let me put it that way, and it seems more credible. Okay, and not that I find the other stuff not credible because they're doing more damage to themselves by revealing it than they are to Sarah Palin. But they got that war going on. You should keep that in mind. First, Steve Schmidt says, "Look, I got trouble with her telling the truth." We mentioned some of those quotes to you yesterday in the program. Then he goes on to say, the report gets released that she had improperly used her government position in Alaska, and Steve Schmidt says, quote, she went out and said, this report completely exonerates me. And in fact, it didn't. It's the equivalent of saying down is up and up is down. It was provably, demonstrably untrue. And yet they still kept her on the ticket. All right, now to foreign policy. When she came in, they literally got a globe, and they had to start going around the globe and explaining to her on a world map what the different countries were about, what the foreign policy implications to the United States were, the history, etc. And that's why they would keep giving her the index cards. Okay, what's the relevance of South Africa, for example? Okay, what's the relevance of South Korea, etc., etc. Which leads us to this devastating example. They got to South and North Korea, and she didn't know why they were separate countries. She doesn't know anything about the Korean War. She doesn't know why the South and North are divided and what the policy implications are for the United States. North Korea is in Bush's quote-unquote axis of evil. Certainly with their nuclear weapons and their out-of-control dictator, they would be fairly relevant in foreign policy. She doesn't know anything. That's why in the interviews, she couldn't answer any of the questions because she doesn't know it. And according to these campaign insiders, she even refused to study the stupid index cards they gave her. Imagine giving Joe Biden index cards on different countries. I mean, almost any other politician, forget Democrat or Republican, imagine giving Dick Lugar, the Republican senator from Indiana, index cards on what the difference between South and North Korea are. It would be unconscionable. And she kept repeating the same mistake that Saddam did 9/11. You got the McCain camp trying to explain to the VP nominee, no. Saddam Hussein was not responsible for 9/11. He didn't order it. He didn't come in. She's like, oh, I don't know. I think he did. This is an absolute disaster, okay? And how you can support this woman is beyond me. It's sad, it's sickening, and it's an embarrassment to the whole Republican Party. And that's why you see from time to time, even on Fox News, people saying, well, she could really use polishing on the issues. She doesn't know a damn thing.